never know sometimes. All right, so I have a high challenge in front of me to inspire you guys all to want to collaborate and kind of embrace your role as a therapy professional in, I don't know, 60 minutes or less. So we're going to see how this goes. But again, we're going to talk about collaboration and coaching and really our role as therapists in that participation mindset, which is so critical. So very briefly, because this is less important than the content, as she said, I'm an occupational therapist. I do have my resident ATP. I do some private work. And as she mentioned, I am one of the 3 mentors in year 1 of the Joy Zabala Fellowship. I am partnered with somebody who does work in Texas. I'm in Florida. And we work on supporting her goals in terms of how to transform her practice to support the area she's in. It's been an amazing experience. I was very fortunate to have worked a little with Joy before she passed, and could not be more honored to be continuing her work. As an aside to that, and before the fellowship came along, a bunch of us kept coming up with things that Joy has said or work that she has inspired, and wanted to make it available. So the link that's in here, and hopefully the slide's updated because I just added it, is to kind of a, I don't know, print on demand kind of store that has a whole bunch of sayings and ideas about universal design for learning, about assistive technology, stickers, mugs, you name it, we have it. So it's just one way to kind of continue the work that she's doing. But again, you don't care about any of this. If you really want to dig deep into my disclosures, there's a link on the slide. Most everything I'm going to talk about are things that I've either used in my private practice or in the school system that I work in, that pays my full-time salary, that I have found useful as a strategy or support. So just to give you a little bit of a roadmap, we're going to talk a little bit about collaboration and coaching. We're going to talk about the participation mindset, a tiny bit on UDL and what some of us as service providers can provide. And then I'm going to spend a little chunk of time of when it all goes awry, when collaboration and coaching is not working. How do we get back on track? And then probably I will breeze through resources because of time, and we are going to do 2 kind of case examples built into the end of the presentation. Please, if you have any questions as we go along, drop them in the chat box. I hope to have a couple minutes at the end to address them. If it's something that is pertinent to the slide and I can slide in an answer, I absolutely will do that. Everything that I'm going to talk about and way more are in the link that they've posted for today's session. You'll see it's a wakelet of resources, and it essentially allows me to put all of the things that you might need, including the link to the slides. All of the links are in one place. So everything I'm going to mention everywhere, and more stuff that I probably won't get to, are all included in this wakelet. Links to PDFs, links to websites. So if I mention it, it will be in the wakelet. I like to describe wakelet as if Padlet and Pinterest had a baby, right? So it's the visual that works really well in terms of a Pinterest, and it is the organizational structure of a Padlet. So that's the link, and I know Chandra will keep kind of dropping it in there for anybody who joins after. So just briefly, when I talk about terminology, I'll use AT. When I talk about assistive technology, I might throw a little AAC in there for augmentative and alternative communication. I tend to refer to OTPs, or occupational therapy professionals, that encompasses both OTRs and assistants. And I try to use the similar terminology for PT professionals, both PTs and PTAs. I try really hard to stay neutral in my terminology because I am in Florida, things are different. If I mention something that doesn't jive, drop it in the chat box or reach out to me afterwards and I'll be happy to clarify. One last warning is that you will hear both person first and disability or identity first language from me. If I were speaking to one individual, I would ask what their preference is. If I'm speaking to a large group, I probably use things interchangeably. And if you want to read more about kind of the autistic adult's point of view and what we're learning, there are 2 links there from Learn, Play, Thrive and Autism Level Up that can give some great information. So I want to take 1 second while we're walking into this talk about collaboration and coaching and really ask you to see if you can zero in on one why. Why do you do this work that you do from whatever perspective you're in? And I would love for you to drop that in the chat box. Use the chat icon if you're on your desktop, or on the bottom right, you'll see kind of the icon of how to find that. If you're on a mobile device, this happens to be from an iPad. Why do you do this work? What about this work makes you stick around to do it? I know that's a deep and wide question for 8 a.m. your time, but try to hang with me. And why do we do this work? Yeah, Catherine, if it's for the money, maybe I need to investigate moving to Oregon. Yeah, building relationships, absolutely. Anyone else got an idea of why you do this work? I can't, for you, tell you why you do your work. I love that, Manaz, being the voice for the underdog. Seeing students become successful and independent. Yeah, hopefully the work is meaningful too, because it's not for the pay, right? And the difference between geriatrics versus rehab and rehab versus school. Yep. The shared joy with our students. Man, I love those moments, right? Love to help others help themselves, supporting kids and staff, increasing self-efficacy. Man, that's a great way to think about why do we do this work, right? Because that kind of transcends any setting or kid-student situation. You know, if we can successfully say we've built self-efficacy, wow, you know, have we done our job? And is that, you know, is that anywhere in our listed scope of practice or guidelines? Maybe not, but woo, that's really what we're shooting for sure. The need is there. So yeah, you know, I think we're never gonna fully work ourselves out of a job. And I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily, because I think we have a unique perspective as therapists to kind of provide to the teams that we're supporting. So I want you to keep that why in the back of your head as we kind of talk about the what. So just a little walk down memory lane for you. Over the course of this year, these are all the things that you have had the opportunity through Project Echo Ties to kind of talk through. And I know maybe not all of you have been able to come to all of them. Maybe you've caught some of them on replay. But when we look at all of the things that we play a role in, right? I think for me, that's really awesome, right? That's a wide grasp of ways that we can support our students. Everything from very practical, how do we assess trunk control, to kind of big picture, what are the competencies that we need to have? And then, you know, I love me some Judy Schoonover jumping in there with the really, really practical last month. So I think when we think about all the places that you guys have traveled this year, my hope is at the end of this that you can kind of see some common ground amongst all of those topics, right? And see what it is that we're able to do, not just maybe asked to do or what's in our written job description, but the ways that we're able to positively affect the lives of the students and families we work with. So for me, I would say, even as a school-based therapist and not the position I'm now in, the majority of my job was collaboration and coaching, right? So yes, we're direct serving students and we're making sure that they have the equipment that they need and we're working on specific skills. But if you don't have collaboration and coaching for the team that you're working with around that student, like you lose a little bit of that magic, right?
All right, stop, collaborate and listen.
I age myself when I use that clip, but I really want you to think about how are you collaborating, right? When I think about collaboration, there are three these are not research-based models. These are Elisa's brain, and at one point, Hillary Goldlight-Fowles and I did a presentation that included this. So are you like that first image on the bottom left, where you're kind of like planets rotating, but you don't ever kind of connect or touch to each other? Or there is in the middle picture just a little bit of interaction or collaboration happening, right? The goal would be that we're that last picture, right? That all of our interactions are kind of intertwined, so that what I'm doing to support a student is carried over and is present when we're working with that teacher in the classroom, or that the parent is supporting the student at home, right? So I think when it comes to collaboration and coaching, there are lots of little elements that make this work, right? And make it so that we can do our roles. This is from an article, it's called Together We Can Do So Much, looking at collaboration in schools. It tries to kind of provide a framework, right? And to me, these are kind of, whether you want to look at them as building blocks or puzzle pieces, these are the things that we need in our teams in order to be successful. So at the very core, I love it. Somebody mentioned, and I'm going to forget who, Kelly Tran, building relationships, right? If we don't have relationships with the staff and the families we're working with, then none of these other things in terms of their engagement with us, our shared kind of vision and values, are going to result in good collaboration, right? That means we've got to have good communication and trust. We've got to have a mutual respect that maybe I'm not going to agree with you every single time we come to the table, but I'm going to respect that you have a right to your opinion and I have a right to my perspective, and we're going to meet somewhere in the middle, right? And that we're building kind of common understanding and responsibilities, and knowing that like our role is to actively participate in helping everyone make decisions, right? As we kind of work our way up these building blocks. So I'm one of those people that likes to be able to conceptualize how we do this work visually. And if that's of help to you, the link to the full article is in the Wakelet and is linked on the slides. So when we're trying to gather consensus, I think it's really important for us to think about how we're interacting with people. And this goes beyond what do we write on their IFSP or their IEP, right? We might write consultation, but I don't necessarily think in terms of our participation or the impact. I mean, consultation like we talk with the team every month to see how they're doing. I feel like our goal over time is to build from just telling them, like we're just informing them of what's happening, all the way up to kind of helping to empower our teams so that in the ideal world, we have a teacher, regular ed kindergarten teacher, who says to us, you know, Johnny was really struggling with this. And I remembered this other student you told me about that this, you know, thing worked, maybe using a slant board or whatever it is, that educator feels empowered based on the collaboration we've done to be able to try to start some processes, right? And they have some good knowledge. We want to involve them. Sometimes we got to pull them in. You know, sometimes we have educators that are a little more resistant. But I think our ultimate goal is to kind of climb the steps of this ladder as we're interacting with our teams. This is just a visual to think about when we talk about consultation, maybe even in the strict definition of how we provide our related services, right? It's kind of expert based, right? Like we're coming in to consult with you and offer our expert opinion in this moment, right? There might be some coaching involved, but typically we're kind of initiating that process because we have a legal mandate to do so based on what we wrote in this kiddo's plan, right? Whereas collaboration really means that we're coming in as equals, right? And we're looking at how can we, with our shared knowledge, kind of figure out a best outcome for these students, right? In the broadest sense, even though we're obligated to provide consultation, those relationships are really voluntary, right? But it's about how do we approach sharing those resources or having those conversations with kind of mutual respect that helps us to be able to have really quality collaboration, maybe while we're consulting. So most educators, educational professionals, including us, don't get in this business for money, right? That's just the plain old fact. I think we live and kind of push the margins of being in that learning and growth zone, right? That's our whole purpose. I love this image of the comfort zone kind of graphic with these concentric circles, because I think a lot of times our role with some educational professionals, some parents, maybe outside providers we're collaborating with, is kind of to pull them into this, it's okay to not always have all the answers and to be that expert, because we come at it with this perspective of we're going to observe a situation, right? There is one thing I feel very confident in as an occupational therapy professional and from observing my PT professionals is that we are experts at observation, right? I don't know if you've ever found yourself like out at a restaurant or in a public place and you're just a people observer, right? Sometimes you're looking at there, you're like, man, that gait pattern is really off. You can't shut that observation mode off, right? And I think it's really critical for the work that we do so that we can kind of leave ourselves out there in the learning and growth zone, right? Both for ourselves as professionals and for the educational staff we work with, and ultimately for the students and the families that we serve. So hopefully you have seen this document, but very rarely do our three professional organizations agree and work on a single thing together. So when I see AOTA, APTA, and ASHA, I don't know why they're pronounced their acronym and we spell ours out, but when I see them put out a document, I pay attention, right? Because if they've taken the time to collaborate as a professional organization, it's really important. So the whole focus of this document is to talk about what our role is in writing and serving our students through their IEPs, their goals, right? Maybe you can use the reactions perhaps, or even drop in the chat box. How many of you guys have seen this document before? Before today, when I brought this up, how many of you have seen the document? Okay, so got a couple that have seen, a couple that haven't. Scrolling through the screen right now to see if anybody's using reactions. All right, so I would encourage you, I'm not going to like dive deep into an entire study of this document, but what our three organizations are saying is we should be collaborating when we write our goals, right? We should not be writing a goal where the beginning of the goal or the end of the goal has in parentheses OT. This is OT's goal. Or a communication goal has SLP. The SLP will support the student by doing this, 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 and this, right? The goal should be us writing a set of goals collaboratively from a multiple service provider perspective, right? And they give some great examples in here, but they talk about, they use the same language we do in our IEPs, right? What's the impact of their need on their education, right? What do we know about what they're doing now, their present level of performance? And then that kind of orange-ish arrow is let's collaborate on the goal we're writing, right? And then talk about what is each of ours role in providing the support for that goal. I have told them that they spelled collaborate wrong and it still hasn't been fixed. Irregardless, I think it's really important to think about, all right, how can we do this, right? The example they give is they're not able to independently complete, a little small chunk of an assignment, right? What do we know about why? They can't sit up in their chair. Fine motor affects them, instructions are difficult, and the classroom is overwhelming auditorily and visually, right? So they write a goal for those needs, but then the team sits down and thinks through who's going to do what of this goal and why, right? Now, this doesn't just magically happen. We get out our magic wands and we're able to say, oh, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this. That's collaboration in action, right? So this kid's having trouble in how they're sitting. And of course, it's hard to do an assignment if you're not sitting in your chair. So PT is going to work on making sure that things are happening in the classroom to support that. Our OT professionals are going to come in and look at, is there another way for them to complete this assignment, right? Our speech language professionals are going to think about, how do we manage that attention and sequencing and visual supports maybe for the assignment instructions. And then our educators are going to really make sure, how do we either adapt that assignment or provide specific set instructions and integrate all those other tools so that the student can do this, right? So this is one example, but I think it kind of captures the direction I kind of hope our professions are heading, that, you know, the SLP doesn't own the communication goal and somebody else is allowed to work on and address that. So it's not a very long document by any means. I don't remember, it's 3.5 pages, I think, by the time you remove the citations. I would highly encourage you to start this process. Again, maybe it's one team member where you have a great relationship with the team members and you can say, hey, let's throw caution to the wind here and let's talk about, how do we write good goals so that the students are getting what they need, and then all help support that, right? Because absolutely, like you're saying, like, students are only going to be more successful when we're serving them in a collaborative model, right? So I love all things Brene Brown. And this, to me, when I talk about this change, I am fully aware that what I'm asking is maybe producing a little upset or anxiety, right? It's not change that causes the anxiety. It's the feeling we are without defenses in the presence of what we see as danger, right? That causes anxiety. And I would even maybe say, instead of danger, it's apprehension or worry. Like, sometimes we are really stuck in our ways of, this is how I write goals and I know how this works and I'm very uncomfortable with thinking about something different, right? And I think it's important because people want to do a really good job at their job, right? Most people don't come to work to think like, how can I do the bare minimum, right? People want to do, and it's sometimes, if you write collaborative goals, people get the impression that like you're having to do less. And that's absolutely not the case at all. So in the early intervention in schools special interest section documents they sent out, they did an entire document that's linked there and in the Wakelet about interprofessional collaboration. And they really kind of broke down these 6 things, these characteristics of teams that help to support the collaborative effort, right? And I'm not going to read them to you here because we're going to break them down in slides. But when I think about the first one, voluntary participation, right? You have to have team members that are willing, right? That are committed to and realize there are some benefits to us doing this together, right? If you've got somebody that is holding fast to like, I can only do this that way, that's going to probably hinder your team in collaborating as easily and as well as they could. Equality and mutual respect is huge, right? It's very off-putting if somebody on the team walks in and says, I am the only one who knows about fill in the blank in that area. And so I'm the one that needs to write the goal for whatever that is. So if you're promoting good collaboration, you're willing to take a step back professionally and say, I don't always have to be the loudest voice or the expert in the room. I can contribute, and someone else might have an idea that's a little different than mine, but might be the best thing for that student. Common purpose, I think, hopefully is self-explanatory, that we're here for the learners, period. It's not about whose ego is getting miffed by the fact that we want to change how we're doing this and collaborate more, right? Our goal is to develop a good, cohesive plan with good objectives for our learners so that we can measure it, we can make progress, and we can figure out when we're not making progress, what do we need to do differently? 99% of the time, when a student does not make progress on their goals, it is not the fault of the student. It means we either didn't have the best information when we made a goal and we set goals that were not appropriate, or how we as adults are implementing them. Sometimes that's we're doing it in a silo, and what we do in OT happens behind the magic door, and nobody knows what happens when we pull that kid out and we work with them, that it doesn't get carried over into the classroom, and that's what causes the student to not make progress. So we have to have joint responsibility, right? We have to know that what I do when I'm working with a student on therapy interventions is as important and equally contributes to what success they're having in the classroom, and vice versa, right? That our educators have an equal and joint responsibility that what goals we're helping to support are being addressed in those classrooms. We really have to make sure we're sharing resources. I think that's one thing that the pandemic did help us kind of think through, like, how do we freely and in a respectful manner share what knowledge and expertise we have for the benefit of all, right? I have secret knowledge as an OT, right? I know things that maybe my special educators or regular educators did not get in their degreed work, or don't experience maybe in the day-to-day work that they do, but I can share that expertise, right? And I can show somebody, hey, you know what? The trick to getting that learner to hold their pencil a little differently is, to do a pencil flip, or to put a cotton ball in, the pocket of the third, fourth, and fifth fingers. Those secrets don't need to be so highly held that nobody knows them except for us and what happens behind the magic door of OT, right? The more we share resources, the more that's going to promote collaboration. And then finally, that we're making some collective decision making, that it's not a singular person saying, this is what we're going to do, this is the direction we're going to go in, and that's how it's going to be, right? We've all been on teams, whether it's in our school system work or other places and volunteer work, where somebody pushed forward and said, this is how I think it should be. And in the long run, what that means is that person gets their ideas and their knowledge on the paper, but maybe sometimes our perspective and the knowledge we have isn't there. And again, who loses out in the end in this case? The learner, right? We need to be making student-focused decisions that are discussed and agreed upon, right? It's not just, this is the goal we're going to work on, right? Absolutely, Deb, please, if you have questions about these, or if something rings true for you, I am not opposed to you even unmuting your microphone and asking a question as you go on. I know there's like lots of theory, but I promise some practicality is coming too. So in terms of resources, I wanted to put a couple of things out there because I've been doing lots of work in the area of coaching. And some of us are in positions where we do need to do some coaching, whether that's with our students and our team members or with our co-collaborators. So these are great resources. They're all different books about coaching. There's more here. We're currently doing a book study about this Jim Knight Better Conversations book, and it is amazing. It really does help us to think through, wow, my mouse has just got a mind of its own. To think through, how do we ask questions in a way that don't ruffle other people's feathers and invite collaboration instead of kind of pushing through that real, expert model. I've added some AC and literacy resources. It's not really the topic of the conversation, but I hate to not put it out there. If you're working with students that don't have an established alternative pencil, and you are that OT supporting a student in emergent writing, I highly encourage you to check out the Comprehensive Literacy Book for All book. And as a, plug on my end, I do run a Facebook group study. We're on round 5 of that kind of dives deep into alternate pencils, because I think it's a really great way we as an OT can bring knowledge to the table and help enable a student's success across areas, right? We need to be able to have a way for that student to communicate in writing. And OTs can play a huge role in that as well. So I want to encourage you that this is not, again, a snap your fingers and change things overnight, but how can we start those conversations, right? Is there a way that you could co-treat or observe a session that your learner is going to with another therapist, right? Or really just start in. If you've got a good team that's ready to look at how do we make these goals work, I think it's really important to start with that focus on building relationships. Remember, that's the very bottom of our kind of building blocks, is how do we build relationships so that there's some kind of mutual trust? Because we've all been on teams where like it's the IEP meeting you dread, right? You see it pop up in your calendar and you're like, you just know it's going to be a thing. And I think it's often because we don't have the time or we don't take the time to build those relationships. So in all of those spaces that we talked about in terms of collective decision-making or common purposes, has anybody kind of had an experience that with those things being positive or negative? I'm curious. Got some good feedback on a coaching and collaboration book study. If you think of something that worked positive, I would always like to hear when one of those things worked well. I'm one of those people that loves research, but I love research in action more. Positive collaboration to change, skinning changes after planting the seed last fall. That's awesome that that para came to you instead of you having to go, hey, what do you need? Or hey, could you try this? I think empowering our paraprofessionals, our instructional assistants are like solid gold, right? Like, and if we can build a good collaborative relationship with them, the whole goal would be, hey, that para coming back to you and be like, hey, I tried this, it didn't work. I could try this. Maybe, what do you think? That's amazing. That's a really great collaboration.
You know, Elisa, it reminds me of
Go
whenever I was working in the schools back in St. Louis area. I was doing assistive technology and I had a third grade teacher who would always look the other way, never made eye contact with me, did not want to talk about technology until she needed it for a student. And so we started very slowly, of course, making sure that I met her where she was at because I knew she was terrified. And over time, it started to build as we would sit in next to each other in meetings. She started to slip me notes about what her suggestions might be for the new student. And then whenever I left Missouri to move to Oregon, she actually applied for my job. So it may not be a quick thing, but just staying in there and again, meeting people where they are.
I think that's fantastic. Again, and sometimes you may not bear the fruit of that initial work, but when that person approaches another relationship at another time, you never know how you modeled collaboration and supports can carry over to their work. But work and supported employment, that's a huge role. Collaboration between care partners. Yeah, I think OT professionals' role in transition is probably the most underutilized space, right? We get students into high school and we think, they can be on consult or we can dismiss them, especially for our kids who are kind of post-school but deferred their diploma, right? 18 to, in Florida, we can go to 22. We have a huge role there, right? That's great. When you're starting to look at changing services for a student, having those conversations early so that the student is able to do what they need to do, and especially that the team members feel like, oh, I know where I could go with this and I agree, or maybe there's this little thing I want to tweak before we change those services. I think it helps it not be this contentious thing where I'm like, nope, they're done, they're ready, and it's not like me saying that, it's everyone in agreement because we've kind of cleared the deck of all the things that could potentially be spaces they could work in because they do feel empowered, right? That's fantastic. So if my PT colleagues will bear with me for just half a second, I want to take a little walk down memory lane for us as OTs. You probably studied PEO in school. This is one of those participation models. This is not the best image of it, but it's the cleanest way to kind of see the big picture of obviously who that person is and where they're working. Kind of, there has to be a picture in the middle of what we want them to do, right? And we know our learner's occupation is to be a student, right? To do all those things that involve our school routines. And we want them to be able to demonstrate that knowledge, right? So this is a prettier picture of that PEO-PE model, right? Looking at their occupational performance and thinking about all the factors that go into that, right? And I think sometimes we're very quick with learners to not think about this huge bigger picture. It's one of the things that OT professionals do really well when we're looking holistically at a learner to try to kind of pinpoint, is there something going on physiologically, right? Like, are they not sleeping at night? Is there a home life disruption that's making their occupational performance kind of stink? I think when we think about the big picture, right, it's that center goal that they can perform and participate, right? And I'm curious what everyone, not just OT friends, think is a good functional definition or description of participation. What does that mean for you? And again, you can unmute or drop it in the chat box.
A question of clarification, the ultimate participation in the goal, you mean, or participation for the student or participation on the team?
100% understand the need for clarification. This is what happens when I adjust slides at the last minute and don't make them clear. So our ultimate goal is our students' participation and performance, right? But in order to know how we get that goal in place, we need to be able to define or describe what participation and performance looks like, right? So for you, how would you define or describe participation in the setting you're working in? Meaningful action towards a personal goal. Absolutely. Understanding and bringing a person into the conversation, meeting them where they're at. I love that, with curiosity, right? And understanding, not saying, I don't agree, but saying like, I'm curious, or I wonder, why is that happening? Or why do you feel that way? Absolutely. I think it helps enable more full participation. Anybody else have a thought about how you would describe, what does participation look like in your educational setting? Yeah, I love that word engagement, right? We can tell when someone is able to fully participate, they're engaged in what those tasks are, that there's joint connection and collaboration, right? Yeah, so if the student is able to interact with their peers, they're having success, like what we think of as a positive outcome in school for them, that they're having a really good, meaningful engagement. Yeah, I mean, our whole goal is to help them participate in whether that's their school environment, their curriculum, the goals they're working on, and ultimately when they leave us post-school, right, we want them to be able to participate. I love the fact that many of you in these definitions use this, wow, I need a new mouse too, use this word meaningful, right? Because I think sometimes we get stuck in our old school thinking of, well, either this is the next step for them in writing, or this is what the standardized test showed that they're not able to do. and forget that whether they close their O's fully when they write a word is important. But in the bigger picture, I think it's really important that we're able to give them the tools to meaningfully participate. I just evaluated a high school student, and I would not say that the writing is the most legible. However, they are able to meaningfully complete their work, and most tasks are not going to be handwriting driven, right? So for in our high schools, we got to think about, what does meaningful participation look like? And it's an ode to Judy Schoonover that participation specifically has AT embedded in it. Because
Elisa, I love your eyebrows, but you're doing that thing
oh
again.
my goodness, I am so frustrated with my camera. All right, thank you for telling me that. Let me figure out what the heck is going on. All right.
It's a great stress relief when you're working with kids.
All right, I'm going to turn it off for a minute and see if we can kind of move forward, and then I'll give it a rest and turn it back on. But I think assistive technology and our role, whether you're a physical therapist or an occupational therapist, is incredibly important, right? It's incredibly important that we're looking at the tools that are going to help them meaningfully participate, knowing in the big picture of things, how do we perform our task and participate in our occupation? It's not handwriting all day, every day. It's not only one way to demonstrate or do your work. And I think we need to embed that in the work we do much earlier on. I just want to mention and share that similar to that other comfort zone, growth zone, I shared, and this links to a PDF. The PDF is also in the Wakelet. When we're approaching our students who are neurodiverse, autistic, anywhere in that scenario, I think we need to make sure, while we're talking about meaningful participation, that we're also taking into account what neurodiversity implies or means for those learners, and that some of our learners are going to struggle with things based on their neurodiversity. Struggle is probably not even the best word, but we can help support them in making sure that we are building their confidence, that we're giving them tools so that when they do need to be in environments where they're stretched, that they have the tools to advocate for themselves, right? And to be participating in a way that works based on their needs. So I want to take a little bit of a spin. I know you've talked a little bit about UDL and MTSS across the year, but I think, again, other places where collaboration, small steps, if maybe your teams are not at that collaborative goal process yet, but they can get there. I think opportunities are absolutely there for us to support our teams in more unique ways. So from an OT perspective, and absolutely, I think this could easily say PT as well, these are all areas that we kind of support when we look at learners holistically, right? Maybe they're ADLs, maybe it's social participation, maybe it is health management at school, sensory processing strategies. If it's little ones in early childhood, it's play. So of these spaces, are there ones that you feel like you are supporting all day, every day the most? Or are there ones that you maybe do very little support with right now? Just curious. I think I spend a lot of time with my older students working on like work structures and executive functioning, which I think sometimes for us as therapists is less fun than, Shannon gets to focus on play. That's amazingly fun. I think probably I spend a little bit of time on, making sure a student knows that like we should use our devices up till a certain time, but you can't regulate that all the time. So yeah, another early childhood, right? So a lot of work on play, and it's going to vary depending on our learners' ages. I 100% agree, Shannon, in that natural environment of recess and PE, or we have library media, music, like those are really rich environments for us to intervene. And I feel like oftentimes it's like, all right, well, our time that's available is to pull them out of their elective or their special or recess, when in reality, us pushing in is an incredibly good way for us to model, right? I love pushing into art as a therapist because it allows us to model for that art teacher. And I've had art teachers later that have come back and said, you know, here's another student, and I saw that thing you did with Joey, and I tried it with him and it really worked. And I had one ask me, is it okay if they use that? And I'm like, is it okay? That's amazing. I am so glad that you thought to link that tool that you saw work before, but that would have not happened if I hadn't pushed into those settings. So I agree. And yeah, I know that there are some states that have refined their practice act. Florida is one of them, to include mental health. I don't know what the state of Oregon's practice act is at this exact moment. But I absolutely think we should have a seat at that table. Are we the sole expert in that area? Absolutely not. But I do think we can have a very positive effect in maybe seeing things that a licensed mental health counselor or social worker wouldn't see. So yeah, I mean, I would be curious how many of you guys are working in the mental health space or are contributing to those conversations. I think post-COVID, it is a huge area of need for sure. I think ideally across our practice area that we would be addressing all of these, not maybe equally depending on the age of their student, but I think in a way that is balanced based on the population you're working with.
Elisa, I just wanted to
Yeah.
make a comment about when you're working with a team, recognizing what is in everyone's scope of practice, and of course, always maintaining and being true to your licensure. And as teams, making sure that you're not expected to do something that does not fall within your licensure. So clarity of roles, I think, is something that everybody needs to start with in their collaboration and understanding.
Absolutely. And I think it's important for learners to for educators to be clear about what is and isn't, and also what your comfort level is. If your comfort level is not in that space, then I think it's really important to seek out professional development and to be honest with your teams. Hey, this is a space where I know we have some rules, or this is my limited kind of view of what I've noticed is at mealtime when I'm working with them, like they're really not engaging with their peers, and I think it's contributing to them not wanting to be at school. So and then the licensed mental health counselor or social worker can really engage with that. But yes, knowing your scope of practice, knowing your practice area is huge. And I do have a couple of resources for that that I think maybe will empower you to do what you need to do. Let me hide those little controls. Okay, I know we've talked about UDL in the past. You've probably heard the term UDL. Just as a brief perspective, when we're talking about universal design for learning and what our potential roles are, we're thinking about how are we helping to engage folks? How are we representing their materials? And how are we asking them to act on it and show what they know, right? Those are linked if you have ideas or resources. This is a really great PDF of a guidelines wheel that a lot of our teams that I'm working with print and have, right? You put the little brad in. I've seen little other ways to produce it, but it has all these options and things you can try that are kind of universal design focused. What you will probably see as you look deeper into these options is that a whole slew of them are things that are within ways we would recommend. There's a whole set of options for self-regulation. And these are things that could be universally applied. I can't get it to zoom to the right zoom, but you can see there are things that could be universally applied, across settings. And it's just a good idea generator when we're wanting to think about whole class supports for students and teachers. What the heck? Okay. All right. So when I think about our role as occupational therapy professionals, I think universal, right? If there are some ways we can impact and help collaborate with all of our school partners, it's starting with maybe in kindergarten at the, a month into school, you help those teachers do a universal screener and just say, hey, if you're working on pre-writing skills or writing skills, here are some ways to encourage them to hold their pencils correctly or form their letters. What we have seen in spaces I've worked with is doing these universal kind of screens and outreaches. And I don't mean the OT does it. They say, hey, kindergarten teachers, can I jump into your department meeting, your grade level meeting for 30 minutes and talk to you about handwriting? And here's a tool. It's the screener of handwriting proficiency we use. And give it to the teachers, have them do it. We have seen it reduce the number of referrals that end up coming to us, right? Because that teacher is universally providing supports. AOTA also has a fact sheet on our role in UDL that I wanted to make sure I linked as a resource. Because I think, again, and there's a whole other document that talks about universal design for learning and occupational therapy, but I think it's us leveraging what we know as practitioners, right? In order to say, okay, here are some more flexible ways that you could present that material, adapt that material, or ask a student to show what they know. And I think it's a space that the more that you do that, the more you're going to build those relationships with your teammates, which is then, in turn, going to make them want to be a good collaborative partner with you when they do that. And absolutely kind of reaching out and informing them, here's some strategies, here's some ways that I could be a resource for you, right? So essentially what this is saying is OT has a role in supporting assistive technology, right? Particularly, I think a specialized piece of that is us being a collaborative partner to look at an environment and kind of how do we put some strategies in place that would enhance that or support that participation, right? You're going to hear participation and meaningful participation a ton as we walk through these. For our physical therapy colleagues, I think a lot of times I will go into classrooms post-pandemic and I see kids in the funkiest positions, right? They did all those years of learning at home where they sat on the couch as they did their educational supports, and they have learned that they put themselves in the weirdest contortions. And I think just a physical therapist going and saying, hey, have you tried, these cues, or have you tried making materials available in this way so that everyone can access them? And then there's a specific role in terms of how physical therapists can support all learners in physical education. But just in general, if we have students that are using mobility devices, sometimes going in the beginning of the year and saying, I want to collaborate with you as you set your classroom up, because I know you're going to have Julia and she uses, a wheelchair sometimes. And so instead of you setting up the classroom and then you having to adapt and adjust the classroom, can we talk about that and collaborate in the very beginning? So I talked a little about scope of practice, right? I think because our scope is so deep and wide, sometimes it can be both overwhelming and an opportunity, right? We have lots of places that we can impact. This is a link to the practice guidelines for 5 to 21. I know there's a separate support for kind of early childhood, which I can add to the weeklet, but I think it's a really great support for us to be able to know what our role is, right? Like, it's hard to collaborate and offer expertise in an area if maybe we're a little unsure about what our role can be, right? And yeah, I have that same question for you guys. What are some challenges as you think about collaboration? Is it just it's super overwhelming and I have a high caseload, and if a student's on consult, I see them once a month, and then that's the time I have to offer to support them. And I think there are some barriers to how UDL has affected things when it comes to funding. If you're serving a student who maybe is on a 504, there's no money attached to that, right? And it is a challenge. If there are other specific challenges, in one slide, I'm going to get to kind of how you kind of can problem solve some challenges to collaboration, but if there's something specific that's a challenge, I would love for you to drop it in the chat box so I can weave it into the last pieces of this. So I think collaboration and supporting teams like this. Wow, mouse on its own brain. All right, hold on a second. Okay, give me just a second. See if I can get it to be happy again, because it just doesn't want to be. I apologize for the brief technical delay.
Well, I had a technical delay too. Maybe today is just a day to unplug and go outside, huh?
It's because we didn't say the tech prayer right off the bat.
Absolutely. I
That's it.
don't know what we were thinking.
Chandra, I'm adding that to your to-do list for all webinars in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So let me just jump in it again. I apologize. It appears to be happier. Just get back to where we were.
I think it does help us feel better though when a tech expert has tech problems. We know
I
it
tell
happens for
you,
everybody.
I live in the space of modeling failure often. So yes, please let that be an encouragement for you that sometimes, yeah, ironic that we're on the slide of saying when it all goes awry. But like, I think we do get in spaces where we attempt to collaborate and maybe it becomes frustrating or it's not effective. I love the Noster model. And if you've never seen it, essentially it is a framework to talk about managing change, right? And this whole, like, we're going to try to shift to be more collaborative in the way that we're writing goals and the way that we're serving students. Like, that's a huge change we're wanting, right? Like it gets us out of silos, which can be difficult because it's great if I go and do my thing and nobody asks me questions about my thing, but that's not necessarily benefiting our learners. So when we think about a difficulty, I kid you not, in my car, on my visor, I have a mini index size version of this. Because when I'm thinking about situations in between schools as I'm driving, often I'm trying to go, okay, like, what is not working here? What about this situation is not allowing us to make forward progress? And in terms of collaboration, essentially what this does is you think about down here in this purple end, like, what are you seeing in your teammates? Maybe it's what you're seeing in yourself, right? Like, I'm super frustrated. Well, maybe I'm missing a resource that I need to be able to do what I need to do. If I have anxiety or I'm sensing anxiety or even resistance from an educator to participate in that, oftentimes it means that they're not seeing the incentive that they need. Like, why would this benefit me, right? Or if they're having anxiety, maybe they're missing the fundamental skill about how to actually do that thing. And skills are something, resources are something that we as therapists can absolutely help support and provide. This links you on this left side to a whole nother Wakelet just about Noster, because I am a Noster geek. But this next slide kind of breaks it down, and both of these are available as PDFs. The vision is really like, why are we doing this, right? And its whole goal is to combat frustration showing up, right? When we look at skills, what we use skill set for is to balance against or combat that anxiety that may appear in yourself or in teams that you're working with, right? The incentives are like, okay, why, the reason, the perk, the advantage, and really its whole goal is to combat the resistance. And I know I've been doing this for 20 plus years. We have a lot of adults that they're resistant, but they're not resistant because they hate children, right? They're resistant because they don't necessarily get like what's in it for them. What is it going to look like, or how is it going to be different if we implement this thing? And then when we're looking at resources, like I said, you know, sometimes it's a tool, and we in our bag of tricks as therapists have tons of tools, or sometimes it's the time. You know, it's someone taking that time to have a very, you know, I have lots of conversations walking with teachers to and from lunch or during their little lunch break to say, okay, what's really going on? Can you talk me through what's not working? How can I collaborate to help support you, right? Oh my gosh, it's happening again. Come here. Oh my gosh. I'm afraid my dog is sitting on some kind of other mouse I had going on back here. I think that might be what happens. There we go. Okay. So when I think about Nostr, and I'm glad to hear that my friends in the Inclusive 365 group talked about Nostr. We're all a little Nostr geeky when it comes to this, because I think it's a great way to process it. And again, in a conversation with a team member, do I go, well, you know, according to the Nostr model, really what's happening is there's no plan for action, and that's why we keep starting and stopping and starting and stopping. No, people would think I was a little crazy. I might be a little, I'm definitely a geek in the Nostr model. I don't do that. But when I'm problem solving with a peer outside of that meeting, or when I'm trying to process what's not going well for myself, I just walked out of an IEP meeting and whoa, was it a doozy? Like, what's really going on here? Like, you know, is it frustration, resistance, anxiety, those kinds of things? And I think, you know, there are times when sometimes it's more than one of them. And to me, I either tackle the lowest hanging fruit, right? What's the quickest thing I can put in place, right? Either give them a reason to buy in. Like, if we're able to do this and it works out successfully, you know, you're not going to have to answer his question every 5 seconds. When do we have lunch? When do we have lunch? When do we have lunch? That's the buy-in for you. Or it's a tool. Hey, you know what? How about I come in and I do one whole group session and we just talk about how do you actually hold your writing tool when you're writing, right? I'm going to come in and do that because maybe you don't, that's not your strong suit as a teacher. You're feeling comfortable. I can come in and provide that as a resource so that you're not frustrated with all your kids and how they're holding their pencils when they write, right? So I just share it because I feel like it has transformed the way that I collaborate with teams. And so when I was thinking about this presentation and how do I really pull together supports that are helpful and that are actionable after this, I hope the Nostr model is part of that for you. I'm going to do one of the scenarios for sake of time. And I know we have a little bit longer, but so it's time for my friend Zoe's annual IEP. She's got vision services, ESE teachers that support her, PT, OT, and an SLP on their team. How could you approach writing her new IEP through team collaboration? Feel free to unmute or to type it in the chat box. What is one thing you could do that would work when you're writing a new IEP to help with that collaboration? What could we do to approach writing it? Right, Britt, that's a great strategy, right? Have a conversation with team, maybe it's part of the team or all of the team, to kind of go, hey, can we talk through what I've seen in my sessions and how we could incorporate that into a goal, right? Huge, absolutely. Ask what's meaningful to the student, especially as they get older and get more aware, right? What's a really important goal? Yeah, start a conversation by email. We don't have time to meet face to face, but let's have a conversation by email about what would be a great potential goal that we could all collaborate on. Yeah, Sean, are making sure they're invited to those meetings. If it makes you feel any better, it is a problem in Florida too, where very often PT, OT, and vision find out at the after the meeting has started or the next day that there was a meeting for their student. Really hard to collaborate when that's what happens. So absolutely, that's one of those kind of roadblocks. If you think through the noster, right? That's a source of frustration because there's not really a good action plan. And it's hard to have a meeting without some false starts if you don't have a plan in place and you're missing the resource of this person. So absolutely. Anything else you would do differently? You guys have captured quite a few of them for sure. Administrators suggested the case manager that, yeah, kids who have more complex needs, oftentimes, sometimes you'll see that they wait until like the day before to start writing the IEP. That's really hard. It's hard to collaborate at the last minute, and starting those conversations earlier so that as you're collaborating on kids who have complex communication needs or complex bodies, absolutely, being able to kind of have a system in place that you start thinking about this earlier rather than waiting till the last minute, for sure. So I won't do the second one, but I wanted to leave you guys with some resources. I always put more things in a presentation than I know I can meaningfully get through. So I pack the resources in knowing that you can refer back to them later. And yeah, staffing shortages are absolutely affecting the ability for us to collaborate meaningfully. And I think it's where we have to get creative and talk about, do we use a Google form to gather input? Do we do an email so it's asynchronous? If you don't have a certain team member on the team, how do you balance that out so that you're still meeting the learner's needs? Yeah, it's a super difficult little task for sure. So these are for your reading pleasure, a set of resources about collaboration, whether that's within school contexts, modifications and accommodations that we can use to support and collaborate with our partners, collaborating with BCBAs, behavior analysts, which I know is a huge kind of movement that we're supporting. And then there's a research article about kind of looking at specifically school-based OT and collaborative consultation. I would encourage you to take action, right? The way to get started is to quit talking and begin doing. I love that we were talking today because I think that's the way that we can start this process. But I think the way to really do that is those small steps we talked about, right? You've come up with a lot of really good ideas of small steps just in this time. And being in Florida, I love a good Walt Disney quote. My challenge is, I know our responsibilities are overwhelming. I know the role that we play. It is critically important and also incredibly overwhelming. I have found that collaboration is actually making our roles easier, right? We know that when we collaborate, those team successes really enable ultimately our learners to better meaningfully participate and demonstrate their growth. So I would encourage you to change one thing. And if there's something that you've already kind of thought of, oh, I wish, or I'm going to try this either at the end of this year or next year, I love it if you would drop it in the chat box. It's okay if you don't have something right off the top of your head, but I think it's really important that we take small actions, right? That we're able to really put in place changes that help move us in that direction, right? It's a long pathway to get to really deep collaboration, but I think it's really important that we do that. And dating myself, but I do think when we look at our team members and how we can move to either dictating our consultation, right? Like, here's my plan, what do you think about it? To here's a proposed plan and I want everyone to add their pieces from their perspective. I think the more that we do that, the more that we're able to move from what is a hard thing to something easier. Again, Brene Brown, daring leaders who live into their values are never silent about hard things. And I think the work that we do is hard. I should have acknowledged it in the very beginning. It is hard work. But I think that we're in this work because we believe very deeply in it and we believe in the change we can make for our learners. And when we live into and out of those values, we're willing to do the hard thing. And collaboration can be hard, but it is so rewarding when you sit in a team meeting and everyone is engaged and they're sharing from their perspective. And we have this whole group of goals that the student has, helped develop, and the team members have all given input into it. It's just such a really positive experience. And my hope for you guys is that you take steps toward that collaboration and are able to implement some of these things, small steps, absolutely, and know that those smart small steps are backed up with resources. You can reach out to me at any time, email, Twitter, Instagram. If you have a question, if you remember a resource I talked about, but you can't find it, please feel free to reach out to me. And absolutely, somebody said, can I share freely, share the Wakelet, share the slides. I could do nothing more than have you guys multiply the effect, right? Not everybody can be here. Not everybody has the time to watch a recording, but if you share a resource or a link from this and it helps activate somebody else's incremental change, then we're moving in the right direction. So I will stop talking there because I know I've hit right